Hello and welcome to another tutorial from CamiPaige Boutique. I'm Brooke Tannehill and today I will show you how I made this strawberry wine inspired stainless steel mason jar tumbler. As always, all the products I used we listed in the description below, and you may even find a coupon code or two that saves you some coin. If you like this video and want to see future crafting tutorials, give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you can be notified of all new content. Also, come join our exclusive Facebook group where you can take advantage of upcoming freebies and giveaways that you aren't going to want to miss. So without further hesitation, let's go ahead and get started. If you've seen me lately, you might notice how long it's been since I started this tumbler, but I just got this mason jar from Tipsy Magnolia, and I am going to tape off the top section. The reason why I do this is because this is a screw-on lid, so I want to make sure that I am protecting this area from paint, glitter, and epoxy, so the lid does go on when I am ready to finish the project and just look at it in all of its glory. So I'm just taking my time and making my way around the top of the tumbler. And I did this live in the Corrupted Crafters Facebook group, so that's why I'm talking, but there's no sound. So I'm just, again, taking my time using just the blue painter's tape to tape off that top section and trying to keep it as straight as possible while also just kind of pushing down on that tape so that we have a nice, good, adhesive kind of border or barrier between our paint and our glitter. After I get the top of the tumbler all taped off, I'm just going to get my sanding block and I'm just going to scuff up the surface. And this just allows me to get really good adhesion of the paints and all of the other layers that we're going to be adding to decorate. So I am going to focus on that kind of rim right there so it does get sanded, but I'm just going to make my way around the tumbler until I'm happy with the coverage. I don't know if it's necessarily coverage or the scuffing, I guess you can say, and just making sure to get all angles of it before we move into the next step. So once I'm happy with the sanding, I am going to spray it down with about 90 or 99% alcohol, wipe it with a lintless paper towel, and then we can move into painting. So on this tumbler, I am using Rosebud from Miss Lillian's No Wax Chalk paint, and you're going to see here why I chose to carry this line of paint. A lot of times when you're working with stainless steel, you have to do so many coats of the paint to get any kind of good coverage. With this stuff, you can do 2 coats and you're really good to go. So I'm just kind of talking while I'm painting, but just going through and trying to get a nice even coat over the entire tumbler. Now, this paint has an amazing mixture, formula, whatever you want to call it, and it has self-leveling properties, which means that it's going to hide any of your brush strokes. So you just kind of lay it on and then it's going to kind of level out. So this is one of the reasons why you don't need as much paint when you are putting it onto your tumblers. So I'm just going to go around the cup until I'm happy with the coverage, and then we're going to let this dry. Since I was live, I just used my heat gun to speed up the process, and then I'm coming in with my second coat of the paint. I'm really happy with the coverage, so I didn't need any more coats of the paint, but I am doing this separately without epoxy or anything like that because this paint does not work well for an adhesive for glitter. So I'm just going to apply my paint, let that dry, and then we're going to mix up some epoxy to apply this beautiful glitter mix. So all I do with this is usually I had been epoxying some other cups, so I just had a little bit left over, but a lot of times you can get away with just what's on your glove. You do not need a lot of epoxy when you're doing this kind of glitter application, but I just put a little bit of the resin over the entire surface of the cup with a gloved hand, and I'm just going to spread it out and just get as little or as even of a coat of the epoxy as possible. So this is really just acting like a glue, so you don't need a lot, because what happens is if you add too much epoxy, you're going to get pooling and it's going to cause your glitter to be inconsistent in color. Now, this glitter that we're going to be using, it's called Dusty Rose, but it has a couple of chunky mixes, or not chunky mixes, but chunky glitters in it. So I am using just a little bit more epoxy than I would if I was just using like fines or super fines, but I'm just taking my time to make sure that I've got nice even coverage over the entire surface. And then that way I let this sit for maybe about 2 to 5 minutes just so it can kind of level out, and then we'll come in and apply our glitter. So here is the glitter. It is called, again, Dusty Rose, and it is the prettiest white with pink undertones that I've ever seen. So you can really see there that like all the different color shifts of this mix. And I'm gonna let her rip, Tater Chip, because we are only doing one color of glitter over the entire surface of the cup. So I'm just kind of going over the entire surface, just sprinkling a hefty, happy dose of glitter because again, we're not doing any kind of ombre or blending. So I'm just kind of taking my time, enjoying this beautiful glitter and applying it over the whole surface of the cup. I'm just going a little bit slower because since this is primarily a white glitter, I always just want to really hope to get the coverage that I want. So I am taking my time, making sure everything is nicely coated so we don't have any bald spots because those aren't cute. And then I'm going to move to the butt of the cup and just make sure that that is nicely coated as well. Once we're happy with the coverage, we're going to let it sit for about 45 minutes, and we're going to move into our coats of epoxy. And when you're doing your coats of epoxy, you want to let the cup turn for about 10 minutes, then pull the tape so that you're not epoxying your tape to your tumbler. Trust me, it's not cute. Now that our tumbler is all beautiful and smooth, it's time to start cutting our vinyl. So I measured the vinyl in this place that I wanted to have the stripe around the tumbler, and I did 2.5 inches for the stripe. So I'm just taking my measuring tape like you see here, and I'm just making little dashes at the 2.5 inch mark so that I can try and get as straight of a stripe on my tumbler as possible. Say that 3 times fast, but this helps me because I use a scrapbook cutter and I like to use the blades, I guess you could call it, and just go down the lines that I'm doing here to try and make it as straight as possible. It never works out this way and I end up having to trim it anyway, but I'm making the effort. That's all I can say here. So it helps and it can get it straight, but not always. So just like magic, here is my scrapbook cutter, and you can see how beautiful this vinyl is. It's just got amazing sunflowers and strawberries. It's really, really pretty. So you can see here, I'm just using those blades. So my cutter has 2 blades on it, and there's little lines on the side of the blades. So I'm just lining those up and getting them as straight as possible. And there we have our little 2.5 inch strip to apply to our tumbler. Since this is a mason jar and the shape is just a little bit different, I wanted to use my ultimate decal guide from CamiPaige Boutique to get a straight line on the cup. And the reason why I really wanted to do this is because it allowed me to really eyeball where the middle section of the cup where it was straight was. So I just do that and I make that line on the side of the tumbler just like that. And that's going to tell me where my straight line is for my vinyl to get it lined up on the cup. So I've got it right there. I'm just double checking everything and making sure it's right where I want it to be. And then I'm going to move in to applying the vinyl to the tumbler. Once we're ready to apply the vinyl, I'm going to use a dental tool just to get the edge of this paper up. I just had fake nails on at the time and it was just being a pain. So I'm just going to get the corner and then separate the vinyl from the paper backing. And I'm just going to kind of fold it over and then use scissors just to cut off a little bit of that paper. And what this allows us to do is to expose a little bit of that adhesive from the vinyl and get it placed correctly on the tumbler before we apply all the vinyl. So it helps you to kind of set yourself up for success, make sure you have it in the right spot before you fully commit. So I highly recommend using this kind of method for applying your vinyl. So I'm just using that blue line that we marked on the tumbler from the Ultimate Decal Guide to get the vinyl lined up as straight as possible. So you can see I've got the straight edge from the vinyl with the line that we marked, and I just adhere that little section of the vinyl, and then you can see I wrap it around, and I'm pretty happy with the placement. You can see that it's lined up. We're looking like we're set up for success. So now that I'm happy with that placement, I'm going to turn it around, and then I'm just going to flip up the paper backing from the vinyl. And so when I do it just like this, so see how that's the paper is pointed out? It's like tenting it. Then I'm going to use my squeegee and just push off the paper backing from the vinyl. So that way we're not taking any chances of the adhesive getting crud or sticking to the wrong spot. It's just literally pushing the paper backing off while adhering the vinyl to the tumbler. So that way it just makes it a lot easier to apply. I'm sorry, it's like kind of a weird angle to see the vinyl, but I'm just going to continually push that vinyl away from the paper backing until I come to the end, and then we can trim off any of that excess vinyl. You can see here that we got that really nice. So I'm just going to push down pretty hard on the seam where those two vinyls meet. So you can kind of see where that was. And I had a little bit of a bubble, so I'm just kind of pulling it up, and then I'm just going to lay it back down. So I'm just going to push really hard on that seam. And what that does, see that bubble again? It was being a little bonehead, so I just pull it up one more time. And then I am going to just use my X-Acto knife to trim a little bit over. So like, let's say you laid it down, you laid the first piece of vinyl down, and then you come over the seam. I'm gonna cheat over to the on top of that first piece of vinyl and cut there so I don't leave any of the underneath glitter exposed. So I'm just going to push down just like there, and you can see the seam pretty well. Like it's clearly identifiable right there. And then I'm just going to, again, use my X-Acto knife and just run it down the seam and then pull off any of the excess. Once we have that laid down, I went into a coat of epoxy just to make sure it was locked in place. And then we are going to move into our pinstriping to really set off this vinyl. For the pinstriping, we are using all TechWrap vinyl, and I wanted to show you this part because first off, this color, which is Millenial Pink, is amazing. But second off, I've had some people mention in the comments that they didn't know that they had to remove the film from the top of the vinyl. So I'm just showing you right here that I'm gonna cut the sticker, but you can already see the film that's coming apart from the vinyl. So just make sure to remove it. I just use my craft knife just like this to kind of slit the sticker, and then I'll just pull back the film on the top. It's really satisfying actually, but I'm just going to cut enough of the vinyl that's going to be enough for my stripes, and I'm just going to use my paper cutter right here to do it. So I'm just kind of eyeballing how much I need and then cutting it to the size that I want for cutting them in my Cricut. Now, for some reason with these pinstripes, I did them bigger than I normally do. So I cut them at 0.25 inches tall by 11 inches wide for the textured silver that you see there. And then I cut the pink at 0.0125 inches tall and 11 inches wide. And I just cut 2 of those for my pinstriping. So once I had those all done, it was time to apply them to my tumbler. So this is one of my favorite hacks for getting straight pinstripes on my cups. So this is also another attachment for the ultimate decal guide that we used earlier, but I just put a marker in the pin attachment, and what I do is I line the tip of the marker with the section of where, or like the place where I want my pinstriping to go. So I'm going to line the marker up with the top and the bottom of the vinyl. So I will here, I think I'm doing the top, I can't really tell, but I'm gonna line it up with the top of the vinyl. Then I'm going to secure it in place right there with the thumb screws, really making sure that it's secure and right where I want it. I always turn it the wrong way. I don't know why. But once it is all good and nice and snug, I'm just going to gently turn the cup, and it's just going to make a nice reference point for me to apply my pinstriping. So here you can see I'm just kind of taking my time, really making sure that I'm getting the line where I want it. And because you have this little base here holding the cup in place, it really doesn't matter if it dances because it's going to be in the same spot. So you can see there, I'm just kind of going back and forth, just kind of holding it in place, making sure again that I have a nice guide to use for when I'm applying my vinyl for the pinstripe. So now it is time to apply our chunky pinstriping lines. Again, I don't know why I did them this size. It didn't come out looking bad, but it was just whatever. But I'm just going to pull a section of the pinstripe up, and I cut 3 lines here. I know I mentioned that I cut 2 before, but I'm gonna show you why in just a second. And I didn't know this, but I just cut an extra just to be safe. But I'm going to line the pinstripe with the seam of my printed vinyl, and I'm going to use that blue stripe as a guide to line up the bottom of my pinstripe with. So the pinstripe is going over the blue line and using it as a guide for that bottom line or bottom edge of the pinstripe. So I'm just going to take my time and make my way around the tumbler. Now, I did mention a little bit earlier that I cut these at 0.25 inches tall and 11 inches wide. Well, that was a mistake. Because this cup is so chunky, it wasn't long enough. So you probably want to cut these, well, not probably, you do want to cut these if you're doing this style tumbler at 11.5 inches wide. So that way you don't have the little bit of a gap that I have right here. Now, the decal from Vinyl Cottage covers up this section, but I just wanted to be safe. So I just took that extra pinstripe that we had and just covered up this section. So I went over the top of both of the ends and you can see them right there. So I just came in with my craft knife and that was super sharp and just pushed down to cut the vinyl to fit into that little spot. So I just did that really quickly and you're not going to know. So even if you didn't have a decal to cover, it wouldn't show. Like you really can't see the difference. And then I just came in and removed the excess from the beginning of the piece that we put into that little spot. Now it was time to do the bottom pinstripe, and I'm following the exact same process as I did for the pinstripe on the top, but I just wanted to show this just because it's a tiny, tiny bit different. So again, I'm going to use the seam of the printed vinyl as a guide, but instead of using the bottom edge of the pattern vinyl that you see here, so like, or the textured vinyl, I should say, I'm using the top edge to follow that blue guide that we laid down. Okay, so I'm just going around the cup, again, using that blue guide to lay down my vinyl and get it as straight as possible, and just making my way slowly around the tumbler. Don't be afraid to pull your vinyl up and get it laid the way you want to. Just don't pull on it too hard, because then what happens is that your vinyl stretches and then it will shrink back up and then you'll have a gap. So don't do that. You don't want to do it. It's not cute. So pull to where it's snug, but not too tight to where you're stretching everything out and it just looks bad. So I did fill in that blank again with that same piece of vinyl, doing the exact same process as before. And then it was time to move into the smaller pinstripe. Now, the process for applying the smaller pinstripe is very similar, but instead of using a guide to lay this down, we're just going to kind of go in the middle. So I'm just going to try and get this lined up as much as possible with the seam from the printed vinyl. It takes a second just to kind of get started. But something else that I also do with this is that I remove the vinyl completely from the backing. And the reason why is because I don't have that steady of a guide like I did with the pinstripe before, with that line that we had laid down. So this is more of an eyeball. So since the cup kind of wobbles on me, I do have my hand at the end of the pinstripe and kind of move it back and forth to get it as even as possible on the tumbler. And I need to be able to do that versus having it on the paper backing. So a little bit different, but I just make my way around and then just come to the seam and use my X-Acto knife, just like I did before, to trim it and get that nice seam that kind of blends in with the printed vinyl. Once we are happy with our pinstriping, I'm going to grab some painter's tape and just tape off this top section of the tumbler. That way we don't risk getting any kind of epoxy up at the top. I did spray seal this twice just to make sure that the vinyl didn't go anywhere before I moved into epoxy. So I'm just taping this off. I spray sealed one coat, let it dry for about 45 minutes, then let it go into a second coat, letting that dry for about 45 minutes. And then it was time to apply our epoxy, but I left the tape on during the spraying process. So here I have applied about 20 milliliters of epoxy to the tumbler, and then I'm just coming in with this glitter, which is called the Drunk Flamingo, and I'm sprinkling it over the surface of the cup. Now this is something that I like to do just to add a little bit of sparkle and make the design look a little bit more organic and not as rigid. So I just like to take the glitter and just kind of sprinkle it every which way. Again, just add a little bit of sparkle, and I just like how it kind of makes the design pop overall. So Sorry it's not completely in frame. I was trying to hold the camera as I was applying the glitter, but yeah, I'm just kind of sprinkling it every which way just to kind of get that little bit of a extra detail on this tumbler. After I was done with the glitter, I let this cup turn for probably about 2.5 hours, and then I came in with a second coat of epoxy, and then it was time to apply the decal. Now, the reason why I like to apply the glitter like this is because it lays down pretty nicely. It kind of soaks into that epoxy, and so you need less coats of the glitter, or less coats of epoxy to cover that glitter. Look how pretty that is. I absolutely love it. Now it was time to apply the decal, so I'm just coming in and I'm cutting off any excess of the clear vinyl from the decal so that I don't have any extra that could cause me problems. I've had an issue before where the clear backing would show up in a design. I don't think it would do this here, but I'm just taking extra precautions. But this decal and the printed vinyl are both from Vinyl Cottage. I absolutely love them, and I'll link them down in the description below. But I'm just going to pull the paper backing off of my decal, making sure, or at least trying not to leave fingerprints on the clear vinyl as much as possible. And I am just going to get this lined up with the seam, making sure that I'm liking the placement, and then I'm going to run my finger down the middle of the decal to lock it in place. And then I'm going to work out from the middle just to make sure that I'm getting it adhered nicely. Now, the reason why I do this is because it's letting the air roll outward instead of getting trapped under the decal and causing bubbles. So by going down the middle and then working my way out, it really prevents as much of that as possible. And then you get a nice decal for your tumbler. I let that kind of sit, and then I went in with 2 coats of epoxy. And while that was turning, I started on the lid. Now, the lid video was corrupted, so I'm sorry that we're going into this, but what I did was I painted the middle section of the lid with a yellow paint and then used the glitters that I will list down in the description below because I mixed them myself to get this nice kind of orangey yellow. And then I painted the outside of the lid a nice red color, and then did a little bit of a red glitter mixed with the orange yellow that we had already mixed. Sorry, I feel like I'm just rambling, but I let the glitters dry, then I spray sealed them, and now I'm mixing up just a regular tumbler epoxy. And I'm doing this because I didn't, or at least the thought process in my mind was I wanted to use a regular epoxy instead of a UV resin because I really wanted to add some rigidness to the lid. So that way, since it is just single walled, I wanted to give it a little bit of strength. And from my research, I don't know if it's true or not, but the regular epoxy is stronger than UV, so that's why I made this decision. So again, the glitter's dry, it's been sealed, but I'm doing super thin coats of the resin, starting with the lid, making sure that I didn't get any pooling, and then doing some nice thin coats on the outside. I probably did about 3 or 4 coats of the resin. I would apply a coat, let it turn for about 2 hours, then come in with another coat. And again, I did that about 3 or 4 times, and then this baby was done. I added the ribbon for an additional touch of Southern charm, and I am just so happy how everything came together. It's an added bonus that I absolutely adored the song Strawberry Wine from Dina Carter growing up. Looking back, that's like wildly inappropriate, but it's all right, whatever. But I could not have been happier with just the overall aesthetic of this tumbler. I hope this tutorial inspires you, and I can't wait to see what you create. If you have any questions about any of the steps or information, please feel free to reach out and I'll be more than happy to help. As always, thank you for watching. It really means a lot to me. If you like this tutorial, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you can see future videos. You can also ring the bell so you're notified of all future cup making goodies. Thank you again. I love you guys. Bye.